Whenever you're ready, Dan.
I'm good, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I apologize. We had to reschedule this to this hour. It was originally scheduled for 1 o'clock, and I'm sure that some people are missing out because we did it last minute. But we had an important conflict that we're super excited about that we're working on. So I had to push this out. Today we're going to talk about gameplay. I'm going to deep dive into a variety of categories. That touch on kind of how you can play, where you can play, and the nuances around some of the strategy, so you can start thinking about what you want to be in the game of Silks and how you're going to play it. And I think you're going to find a lot of this data really insightful and allow you to look at these assets and what we're building in perhaps a bit of a different way. I'm going to start like I always do. This is not, I'm not offering any investment advice. This is a game that involves buying digital collectible assets that have access to meaningful rewards. Ultimately, you have to make the decisions around how you want to participate, if you want to participate, etc. All I'm providing is hypothetical information that would be helpful in allowing you to understand the game and understand how to play the game. Game of Silks is a blockchain game that involves a significant amount of strategy and a little bit of luck. And I think it's a good place to start because there's always luck in games. Just like there's even luck in real-world investing, for that matter. But different games involve different levels of luck and provide for more or less volatility. And it's important to understand that. And part of what we're going to discuss today is how much luck you want, how much exposure to risk you want. What, are you the kind of player that likes playing lotteries where, you're buying something for $1 that will probably never win? Or do you prefer to, bet on more conservative things that have a higher degree of probability of actually making you money, but lesser prize purse? Just examples of how you look at games and levels of risk. And levels of luck, the amount of luck that affects the outcome of a game. I'll just give you a few examples. So poker, there are lots of different poker games. There's Hold'em and then there's Omaha, right? Texas Hold'em involves 2 cards, Omaha involves 4 cards. The difference in the amount of luck that's created in both games is staggering. If you're looking for a game with a lot of action and a lot of volatility, Omaha's your game. If you want less volatility, it's Texas Hold'em. If you're playing roulette, if you want a high payout, you bet on the numbers. If you want a more consistent payout with less upside but less downside, you play black or red. In craps, if you want to get a high reward, you play a proposition bet or the numbers. If you want a more consistent, safer bet, you'll play the pass line. And it's no different, and I can go through game after game after game. It's all the same. You have to pick what you're comfortable with and the kind of upside that you want and the kind of risk you're willing to take. And in our game, there's a lot of that across the board. But at the end of the day, it is a game of skill. And the amount of time you invest in learning about the game, learning about the assets in the game, and learning and thinking about how to play the game, and the strategy you deploy is going to be very important in terms of determining your outcome. The good news is that there's something for everybody, and we've designed the game that way. There's something for everybody budget-wise. So there are a lot of ways to get in the game, whether you want to spend a lot of money or you want to dip your toes and spend a little bit of money. There's the variable of time commitment. Do you want to be passively involved in the game or very actively involved in the game? And that's something that we'll talk about. Your objective. Are you here to have fun? Are you here to be involved in a community? Are you here to make money? Something for everybody. Whether you know a lot about horse racing or you know very little about it, there's going to be something for everyone as well. So you don't have to be an expert to play the game. And you can play the game in so many different ways. Our goal is to have our foundational community shepherd the development of the platform and reap the rewards that come with early adoption. That's really why we're all here. We are all founders of this game. And the earlier that you get in, and this is certainly very early, the more you can help influence and control the development of the game, participate in the development of the game, and reap the rewards that come with early adoption. Whether you're in the real world, and I've talked about this before, if you're an early adopter and contribute to the development of anything, whether it's a consumer product, whether it's a city and buying real estate, living in that market, and helping develop the economy by shopping in stores and restaurants and buying a house. All of those things are behaviors that involve early adoption. And when over time the communities form around these different enterprises and communities, you end up being a major beneficiary or have the prospect of becoming a major beneficiary. I'm going to talk about the entry points in our game, or the beginning entry points in our game, and I'm going to deep dive into each one of them. And then at the end of this, we're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. So the 8 entry points that I'm going to talk about today are the avatar, acquisition and trading, which is what's available today, land acquisition, land development, farm ownership and operations, pinhooking, horse ownership, syndication, and fractional ownership. Those are the categories that we're going to talk about, and hopefully I'll shed light on strategies that will get you really thinking about where you want to play the game. So let's start with a high-level exploration of each category, starting with avatars. What do we know about avatars? We know they're currently the scarcest asset in the ecosystem. I'm talking specifically about the Genesis Avatar Collection. We know that they're necessary to play the game. We know that there are a lot of unknown benefits involving airdrops, claim, potential other utilities. We know that demand will grow as our community grows because there are only 10,000 of them, and we're contemplating a community that's much, much larger than that by orders of magnitude. We know that there are unknown utilities that may be revealed in the future. We mentioned the possibility that you might be able to rent your avatar to a newbie that wants to get in the game. We mentioned that there are other utilities exclusive to Genesis avatar holders that are to be announced. So these are all speculative things that may come to fruition over time. And that's what we know. Now, how can you play the avatar game? And it is a game in and of itself. You can collect and hold avatars in anticipation of the growth of a community, right? As our community grows, so will the demand for our avatars, because they're the only way you can get into the game, and they'll continue to develop value as we begin to roll out more and more utility and benefits for holding these avatars. And they're fun to collect, and that currently drives the market, and people are playing that game already. In fact, as I shared on a post in my Twitter channel recently, according to CryptoSlam, which tracks the actual transactions and related dollar volume of transactions on the date of the transaction, since we launched the Genesis Avatar Collection a little over 4 months ago, nearly $500,000 has already been generated in profit, according to CryptoSlam, from avatar collectors and traders. And that's not that is not a de minimis amount of money. That's a lot of money for a short period of time. So for those of you that have been playing that game, congratulations, and we expect that a lot more people will get involved in that as the community grows. The next is land, which is available today, and here's what we know. We know that the current land available to purchase is the only land available to purchase right now is the exclusive plots in the Skyfalls region. Now, Skyfalls, we know, is the core region in the metaverse. Its designation will have unique attributes and utility. There may be rarities within the land that are at play in the future, although we haven't announced it. We've just hinted to the fact that that might exist. And the land is only available currently through a claim until the MVP launch. So we have not announced that we'll be selling the land separate from your ability to claim it by buying an avatar that still has a claim right. And I'm not going to recap the timeline, but there is a timeline that you should be all familiar with. And if you're not, please go to announcements. It's very clear there. There's a calendar, and it is coming up fast and furious. So that's important. What we have not announced yet is the other regions. And we will roll out a strategy for that in the future, but we haven't announced it yet. We all know that the land is limited to 25,000 acres within Skyfalls. That's enough for 2,500 10-acre farms or 250 100-acre farms in a community that has a right to 10,000 acres. Right? So there are 10,000 potential holders of our Genesis avatar, and the ability for that community to create 10-acre farms is limited to 1 in 4. So there's already scarcity of land and its utility within our Genesis community. How can you play the land game? Like any new development, speculating on land in real life or in the metaverse involves risk, but can also deliver significant rewards. Sorry. You can accumulate land and you can sell it unclaimed, meaning that it doesn't have a specific quadrant designation yet. Or you can claim it and sell it as a unit, which means that you can literally mint a large portion of land, a 10-acre portion, a 5-acre portion, and that becomes its own parcel that you could then potentially sell that will have value, because remember that it's only the Skyfalls minters that received a claim that are allowed to mint them in the way we've described, where you have the contiguity already built in. You can accumulate and hold it in the anticipation of demand growing as the community grows. Once the MVP launches, you'll be able to buy specific land adjacent to existing farms, and you'll see the land that's been acquired in real time. And you can buy strategically in hopes that someone's farm will grow and need your land. So what's going to happen, and we're going to demonstrate this in product development updates through Binny over time as we get closer to the MVP. You'll be able to see in real time the land form and designate as people begin to mint and claim their land. And you'll see farms start popping up all over the place in very random ways within the Skyfalls region. Once that starts happening, you can decide that you're going to buy and speculate on individual pieces of land that surround various farms. And that will necessarily require somebody wanting to expand their farm to buy their land from you. So that is a strategy if you just wanted to play the land game. And it's no different than in the real world. If you come to an area that's rapidly growing, in a city that's rapidly growing, you can buy land strategic to areas that you think are going to need to expand. So it's literally no different. So that's the land development game. Farm ownership and operations is really interesting and becomes a lot more complex as I talk about it. So let's get started on that. How to play the farm game. So there are different kinds of farms. We'll start with the private farm. A private farm is a farm that you can use for personal use, right? So if you want to own your horses outright, you build a farm and a stable, and you can build an estate, and that complex houses your horses. It's a gallery for you to enjoy and to share with your friends. The public can also visit your farm, and you can also look at it, if you wanted to, as a storefront where people could buy horses right out of your farm if you make it available, or they could make offers for your horses. But I think most importantly, it's a really fun place to kind of aggregate all of your assets in an area if you choose to wholly own them. We will also be having competitions and offering rewards for farms based on various attributes and successes. So everybody's farm will be completely transparent in terms of their productivity. How much did your horses win this week as a farm, right? All the horses on your farm. And there will be competitions that you'll be able to automatically be entered into that will pit one farm against another, both private farms and public farms. Private farms allow you to not have to share your horses or earnings with anybody else and compete without partners in the game, if that's what you'd like to do. Um, in the future, private farms may be syndicated or sold in their entirety. We haven't published anything on it, but it is on our roadmap. So that's what private farms are all about. And they're also cloud. So, you'll be able to, over time trick out your farm, add all kinds of digital assets to it, collections of NFTs and other assets that we produce, that third parties may produce, that you'll be able to show off, and it'll be a fun experience for you to invite people into your farms and hang out there and see what you have. Especially if you're collecting horses that become very valuable. I think there's something really cool about seeing that. I personally believe that everybody that owns a private farm will have a personal, emotional connection with that farm and have a pride of ownership associated with it. I can tell you, having looked at these assets and been a part of developing them, it's incredible. It feels like it's yours. It feels real. It's something you're going to want to show off. And I think we're going to all get very excited about it. Public farms, we have different kinds of strategies. So let's start with the first strategy, which I'm going to call a stabling farm. A stabling farm, which we used to refer to as a staking farm, allows you to invite other people to stable their horses with you and create a pool that you can earn, you can share, you can pool your assets together to share in racing rewards. This is no different than an office pool. So some of you may work in an environment where you all throw in money each year, and every week somebody's responsible for buying lottery tickets. And if the office pool for the lottery tickets hit, everybody gets rich and quits. And we've seen stories of that on the news all the time. There are also office pools for Super Bowl games and other things like that where you compete against each other, etc. In this case, you're stabling your horses together to share in each other's winnings. We've spent a lot of time talking about that. And what I'm going to speak about is the strategy around building a farm and becoming essentially the owner of the farm, promoting stabling as a business, as a gamified business. This allows you to play the game without ever owning a horse if you choose not to. You're going to have to define the profile and the parameters of your farm, which will attract other horse owners. So for example, you might decide, I'm going to play this game by developing a specific risk type or risk profile for the type of horses that we want on our farm. So let's say you decide that your farm is you're only going to accept horses that are value horses that have the potential to really, they're high risk, high reward. That's a type of profile. You'll define it. People visiting your farm will understand that's the strategy. And if they have a horse that fits that risk type, you might choose to accept them. Another example of a themed stabling farm is by bloodline. So you might decide, I'm going to build a farm where all I'm taking in is the sires of Gunrunner or another famous stallion. In which case that your farm will be limited to those type of horses. And that becomes very interesting because if I own a Gunrunner and I want to stable it with other Gunrunners and share in that prize pool, I think that becomes a really interesting play. You might also go the other way and have a farm that doesn't care who they accept, in which case your price for stabling in your farm might reflect that as well. One of the things that you'll control is duration. You might have a farm, and the theme around that farm is the duration. So your contracts, your stabling contracts, only last 3 months. That might be attractive to people. Or you might go the other way and say, our farm is a long-term farm, and you have to commit to 5 years. Now remember, when you encumber your horse on a farm in a stabling contract, there's always a way out. And the owner of the farm defines that, right? So there's a breakup fee that he pays or she pays to you if he or she cancels the contract and destables you, or vice versa. Let's say you want to get out of it. There's a fee associated with that you pay and you can get out of it. Those are all things that are going to determine the theme of the farm if you choose to make that a centerpiece in what it is you're trying to achieve. Again, These are individual businesses, and each business can customize itself and distinguish itself for the community. Stabling farms will also have the opportunity to compete in contests that will reward everybody involved, and the performance will be transparent. So you as a consumer may decide, I want to look at the record. As time goes on, let's look at the record of this farm. How many horses have started? How many horses have actually placed and won money? And what does that look like? Do I want to be involved in this consortium, so to speak? And it's going to get really, really interesting, because these stabling farms are going to become like micro communities, and you're going to get to know the people if they're active. That might be another parameter. You only want to accept people in your farm that are going to be active. You're going to have weekly meetings or monthly meetings, or you're going to have watch parties, in the estate of the farm, and you want people to commit to attending them because you want to form a real community that creates an elevated experience for the stakeholders, and that might be a parameter. Remember, these are essentially clubs, private clubs, that deliver entertainment and fun in the form of a lot of different things, community, and potentially making money. Again, these are all things to think about. Now, strategy, I'll take it another level. Let's say you decide you're going to build a farm and you only want exclusive horses that really, could be on the hunt for the Kentucky Derby. Well, in order to attract those type of owners of these horses, you might want to seed your farm with one or two of them. So you might go and invest in a gun runner, for example, or a Justify, or an American Pharaoh, or whatever your favorite stallion is, and use that as an anchor to attract other owners of similar quality horses. And they're only going to want to stable their horses in a place where they are not giving away money, because they want to be in a place where you have the caliber of horses that equal theirs. And that's one way to do it. So you might buy the land, develop a farm, and actually buy or mint a very valuable horse, and then say to the, go out and communicate that you're looking for horses of similar caliber. And remember, as the owner of the farm, you can choose to have a farm where you negotiate and you have the last say and approve the person staking, or you could have an open farm where you let anybody stable at your farm. And if you are very discreet about the type of people you want or the type of horses you want on your farm, the more you're going to have requirements that in which you're very engaged and very active. We talked earlier about how involved you want to be. Well, if you want to be a passive farm owner, then you're not going to be able to set the parameters the same way as if you're very active. And over time, we may create the ability for a farm to self-manage. So, for example, if your farm limits the horses to a specific bloodline, we may develop, and it's not coming out as in the MVP in the beta, and I'm thinking out loud right now, but perhaps that you might be able to set and forget if you decide I'm only accepting these three, offspring of these three sires, for example. So there will be ways in the future for us to automate some of this stuff, but just something for you to think about. Price and duration will be important. How long do you want people committed for? And size does matter. Different risk levels exist for different size of communities. So if you have a 10-acre farm, you're limited to a 10-acre pool, to 10-horse pool. If you have a 100-acre farm, people can pool their horses with up to 100 other horse owners, and that really diversifies your risk. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Those are stabling farms. Let's talk about syndicating farms. Think of a syndicating farm as your personal three-dimensional interactive e-commerce storefront, because that is exactly what it is. It's a place where you now have an opportunity to showcase who you are and why people want to partner with you. Here in a syndicating farm, you can assemble a stable of horses and attract people to partner with you. Now, how do you do that? You curate. So you're going to pick a theme again. You can be everything to everybody. You can just say, you know what, I'm a great, handicapper, and I'm just going to find great horses. And if you want to ride with me, no pun intended, come to my farm and look at what I've got. I'm going to tell you a story about every horse and why you want to be a part of that syndicate. And you'll attract people that way, and ultimately your track record is going to validate how good you are. So early on, people are going to be making a bet on you based on how you profile yourself. So you might have something about a blurb about you and why you're qualified, a little bit about your strategy, but ultimately your performance is going to be transparent, and that's going to dictate, I think, how people are going to view you. And it'll be really interesting because you'll be able to search in the metaverse, show me farms that are 10 acres where, the farm owner has earned X amount of money, or the performance of the horses have fit the following profiles. Imagine that. And then you can literally go out and rush those farms, because actually in syndicating farms, you can buy right from the farm without them approving you if they set themselves that way. If they set themselves as an auction, then you actually have to negotiate. But in the stabling farms, you're going to have to, in most cases, rush them, right? They're going to have to want you as well, like a fraternity or sorority. In a syndicating farm, your strategy and your value proposition has to be very clear. What is your value add? What makes you special? Why should people want to partner with you? It may be as simple as you have the best horses, right? Visibly, you have the best horses. You went out there and bought expensive horses and fractionalized them and now want to find partners for them. It might be that you have the expertise and the track record. You might decide that your strategy, and then you have to think about your strategy. Do I want to own these horses outright and own a piece of them? Am I riding with my partners, so to speak? Do I want a free roll, meaning I minted the horse for $500, and I want to sell half the horse and get my money off the table, and I'm going to free roll with the other half? And many people are going to do that. It might be that you're more interested in just reducing your cost. So I'm going to sell 10% just because I don't want to expose myself to the full cost. Or I just bought an expensive horse and I want to share that risk with other people. So I'm going to sell it at my cost, a fraction of it, because I just don't want to carry that much risk with the horse, even though I love the horse. I'll give you a couple of other examples of strategies and how to think about a syndicating farm. Think about a curated wine store. Why does somebody come to a small wine store in your neighborhood? Because you like the way the owner picks wines. The owner might reduce the collection down to 20 vineyards, and that person can tell you about every vineyard, and that person has visited the vineyard, has tasted all the wine, and can talk to you intelligently about what you're interested in, what you like, and direct you to the right wine to buy. Same thing. Somebody can tell you what they're interested in terms of a risk profile of a horse, and a good bloodstock agent will direct you to the horse you should buy. And the same thing holds true in a farm, right? Where they're going to direct you to their collection and tell you what they think should fit you and your lifestyle, what you want to spend, and what kind of risk profile you want. Think of a hedge fund manager, somebody that puts together a portfolio of stocks and manages that portfolio based on a certain risk profile. It's the same exact thing. And these are the kind of things that you're going to think about. And you might be reflecting right now and saying, well, I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. How am I going to do this? Well, there are many ways to do it. One way to do it is to just pick the best horses or pick a bloodline that you've heard about. Another way is to partner with somebody from within the community that does have the expertise. And a third way, which is really simple, is to go out there and hire an expert. Hire a handicapper. There are tens of thousands of them all over the world that for a very small amount of money will probably help you pick the right horses, or read articles, or look at the rankings. And we're going to provide you with a lot of education to help you do this as well. So you don't have to be an expert to get in the game and to do this. You're going to learn very quickly. The third type of farm, which is on our roadmap, but it's not something I'm going to talk about in detail right now, is a breeding farm. It's kind of way out there. It's a few years away, but we are going to create the ability for people to create breeding farms so that when horses start breeding, whether they're broodmares or they're stallions, you'll be able to create farms just for known breeding horses, and people can essentially participate in the ownership of these horses alongside you. Breeding is really interesting because there are many speculative components to it. When a horse is a stallion, has won a lot of races, has incredible prospect, we don't really know how much of that is going to translate to its offspring. And so it becomes very speculative. And people initially bid up the price of the horse, and the horse is bought for a lot of money. But when it starts producing offspring, if those offspring aren't winning races, guess what? The value of that horse goes down. And if the value of the horse goes down, then you're talking about a volatile horse. But then something might change. They might decide, let me breed this horse with different bloodlines, and all of a sudden they're breeding the horse with a different set of bloodlines, and the offspring are producing. Well, guess what? The value of that horse goes up, the value of the offspring goes up. So, right now the model of the game is you get paid on the owner of the mare and the owner of the stallion get paid on the mint price, and that might change to where we look at the productivity one day of the offspring. Okay, next up is pinhooking. Pinhooking involves finding value and holding short term, right? So trading horses. You're taking the risk of buying a horse up front, and then you're hoping to be able to sell that horse for more money. Now, how do you do that? You do that by doing a lot of research and developing a thesis around a particular horse and why that horse should be worth a lot more than you just paid for it. Doing that research will give you huge advantages, no different than playing fantasy football, spending a few hours researching what happened, watching the games for yourself and seeing what happened and deciding, I like this horse, even though it didn't win, I still like this horse. Or I like that player, I like that tight end in football. I thought he had a really good rapport with the quarterback, but he didn't get a lot of looks because he was covered this week by a really strong defensive player. But because you watched the game, you saw something that other people didn't see, and that gives you an advantage. And the same thing holds true here. The more involved you get, the more active you are, the better you'll be able to play the game. Here's examples of how strategy you can use in pinhooking. Focusing on a particular bloodline could be incredibly helpful. So instead of trying to figure out everything, just pick a bloodline and say, you know what, this is what I'm going to study, and you become an expert in that. Like any trader, you can't fall in love with your inventory, so you're going to have to be disciplined. The more disciplined you are as a pinhooker, the better you're going to be. Decide how long am I going to hold this horse for, and how many horses am I going to invest in up front? What is the price point I want to play at, etc. These are going to be all characteristics that are going to help you become a successful pinhooker. And again, this AMA is designed to give you a very high-level view of strategy. I could spend an AMA on each one of these topics, going deep into how to play at that particular role in the game. Not every trade is going to work out for a pinhooker, and you just have to know when to cut your losses. And a lot of things are going to be going on while you're pinhooking, right? There are real races going on with the bloodline that are going to affect the value of that horse. And if you pick a horse with a bloodline and that bloodline is losing races, the value of that horse might go down. And if that bloodline is winning races left and right or winning big graded races, it's going to go up. That's another way to play the game, is to kind of make a bet on the bloodline when you're pinhooking. You can always partner with a great farm and market the horse, to form a syndicate through them, or combine pinhooking with either a private or a syndicating farm. So there are a lot of roles that you can combine so that you can pinhook if you can pinhook the horse. If not, you syndicate the horse. Or you can create a farm that's tied to the pin hooking, and so you'll either sell the horse within the farm or you'll syndicate it. Okay. The next topic is horse ownership. Are you going to mint? Are you going to buy at auction? Or are you going to buy in the secondary market? So right now there are 3 ways to buy to wholly own a horse, and those are the 3 ways. Minting is the lowest cost entry point, but it also involves risk, right? You don't know what you're getting. What we do know is that this year we're culling the crop initially in the mint to the horses that we believe have the best prospects. So everybody's going to be minting the upper tier of the horses out there. So there are going to be less duds, but again, there have been horses that were sold for $1,000 that won the Kentucky Derby in the past. So you just never know. That's the beauty of the game. Auctions are in between in terms of risk, right? You know what you're buying, and other people might not know, so you might be able to get a deal there. And then buying in the secondary market is the costliest way to acquire what you want, right? So there may be people that really don't know what they have, and you can snipe a horse in the secondary market that way. But over time, we believe that the market is going to calibrate because more and more people with expertise and more people within the community that grow their expertise by playing the game are going to get savvy. And in the beginning, there are going to be a lot of deals, but as this game matures, it's going to turn into just like any other big fantasy game where you're going to have people playing at different levels, and the market is going to calibrate and adjust to the real world. Having said that, there is still a lot of volatility. So, take fantasy football. For those of you that watch football, you might have had a top running back going into the season, into week 1. Well, guess what? That running back, if it was Najee Harris of Pittsburgh, he was injured. We don't know how long he's going to be out. His value just dropped a lot. The same thing happens in horse racing. It doesn't have to be an injury. It could be performance. It could be the performance of a bloodline. All of these things have impact, and you think you've got a champion, and all of a sudden they don't perform. Rich Strike is an example of that. The owner was offered $30 million right after that horse won the Kentucky Derby. I don't know what the horse is worth today, but it hasn't won a race since. So those are the options in buying the horse and looking at the risk versus rewards. Horses fluctuate wildly based on the races they won, based on how their bloodline is performing, and their prospects of being a stallion or a broodmare, which may or may not have anything to do with them winning races. They may just be built the right way. People may notice what their skill sets are and imagine what it would be like to breed them to certain bloodlines. And there are many stallions and broodmares that have had incredibly successful breeding careers that weren't as successful racing. Here is another thing to think about when it comes to horse ownership. We believe that people will buy horses as they see them scheduled to race and perhaps flip them. This happens a lot in this new genre of fantasy that I've been talking about. Sorare, Rainmakers, where you buy the players and then you enter the contests without a cost. What you see happening is when a hot player is playing this week, everybody rushes to buy that player. They use them in the lineup, and then after that week, if they don't like them, they flip them. We think the same strategy might take place in horse racing. When you see a horse scheduled to race, you might want to take a flyer and buy that horse just to be able to see if your horse is going to win. And it's a strategy, and we think a lot of that's going to happen. And that's going to create a lot of really interesting gameplay around that. And there will be alerts in the marketplace that will say, here are the horses racing next week. So you'll be able to actually filter for that and be able to, a lot of that work will be done for you. When you think about horses, you have to think about your risk profile. Do you want a sleeper, a flyer, a known quantity? Again, no different than the real world and no different than fantasy across many sports. The better the player is, the more expensive that player becomes. Whether it's in kind because you have to trade for that player in fantasy or buy that player in fantasy, the better that player is and the better the horse is in our world, the more valuable that horse is going to be perceived at. Now, there are a lot of horses that are going to have a lot of prospects but have not proven themselves yet. They're too young. They raced as 2-year-olds. They didn't do well, but then as 3-year-olds, they're going to blossom. On paper, they look great, but they haven't performed yet. That's an opportunity. On the flip side, you might see a horse that was very low priced, but you see something in that horse. And you're going to invest in horses that are very low cost, but that could really pop. And in every crop, there are many, many horses like that. So that's another way to play the game. And I'm just giving you a very high level about horse ownership, but we could go very deep in this category. Fractional ownership. So this is the opposite of syndication. This is the buyer that's buying a piece of a horse. Fractional ownership is an easy way to dip your toes into the game. You become part of a micro community or a syndicate, right? So as a fractional owner, you're putting up a small portion of the cost of the horse, and you're now partners with up to 10 other people. Fun way to get into a community, fun way to get to know people, and it's a very low-cost way depending on how expensive the horse is. It's also a way to get into a very expensive horse at a fraction of the cost. Some of these horses over time are going to become very, very expensive as this game grows, just like in the real world. If you think about it, a horse that's $100,000 in the real world, in our world at 10% is $10,000, at 1% is $1,000, right? That $1 million horse is $10,000 at 1%. Well, $10,000 is still $1,000 a person, right? And some people are going to want to make that bet on that horse. And again, when I say betting on that horse, I don't mean physically betting on it. I mean buying into a collectible asset that can compete in this game and potentially win a lot of money. You can spread your risk across many horses if you're buying a fractional interest. And some people will choose to own some horses and to dip their toes in, buy small pieces of other horses for a variety of reasons, including risk, including just being a part of different communities. Some people will enjoy that. As you build your skill and knowledge, you can cross into owning full horses. So you can graduate, if you'd like to start small, into owning horses. You might want to make your money in other areas and then eventually reinvest that capital into playing the game at a different level. And we see that happen all the time across many different games. And if you're talking about gambling, you'll see people start in poker, playing 1-2 or 2-5 and then graduating to 5-10 or whatever stakes they want to play as they get better. And as they've made money to be able to afford to play at those levels. In fantasy, it's the same thing. You might start in a fantasy league that's $200 for the season, and over time graduate to a league that's $1,000 or $2,000 or more. That happens all the time. Okay, I'd like to recap my last AMA and talk a little bit about how to look at the economics of all of this. I've gone through all the scenarios that I wanted to talk about today. And I'm just going to recap the economics and kind of bring it into a more applied way to look at things. So let's start with the mint that's upcoming in a few weeks. It's exciting. I can't even believe it's in a few weeks. For $500, you will be able to mint an in-game asset that has the following characteristics. Okay, the average horse will have 24 starts in their lifetime and an average of 6 starts per year. That means that the average horse will race for approximately 4 years, beginning in their second year. So they'll race to 6 years old. Now, these are average numbers, which means that when you look at individual horses, some horses that are great are going to retire after 3 years. Some horses that are terrible are going to race till they're 10 years old. And then everybody's in between. These are the averages that are published by the industry. At $500, if you look at this average horse you're investing approximately $20 per race or $125 a year. If you buy a fraction, 1/10 of that horse, it's now $2 a race or $12.50 a year to own that horse. And if you stable the horse, the exposure is going to be measured in pennies early on. And I'm only talking about this year because we fully believe that as this platform grows, the numbers are going to grow exponentially. As the game grows, these numbers are going to grow. And if you look at daily fantasy sports again as a comp, there are contests that you can enter for 5 cents, for pennies. And then there are contests that are $30,000 or more. And this is par for the course in what exists today in online gaming and gambling. And I haven't even begun to talk about breeding. So again, a horse at $500 may sound to you like a big bet. But when you start looking at the gameplay and the potential life cycle of this asset, it can give you rewards for up to 20 years. And so when you look at the amount it costs and its utility over time, and granted there is risk at every juncture, you have to look at it differently than looking at, I'm making a $500 bet on a race. I'm making a $500 bet on a season. This is a much, much different proposition. And I'll give you an example. In Rainmakers, which is the DraftKings new fantasy football NFT play, when you buy a player, you're buying that player for the season. It has very little utility after that season. And that season lasts a year, or in the case of NFL football, 20 weeks, 22 weeks with the after season. In our game, we're talking about 20 years. It's a very, very different proposition. And if your horse breeds, you have the potential to have a productive asset for a very long time. And if you looked at the cost per year on that basis, it literally is very, very little money, especially if you're a limited partner in a syndicate or if you're syndicating the horse. And especially if you're stabling the horse. The future of Silks is very, very bright. We're sitting here in our infancy. We have a lot to look forward to. I mean, literally, just to kind of bring everybody down to earth. We've been working on this platform for, a year and a half. We're approaching 2 years. We've only been public for 6 months. We only minted a little over 4 months ago. And yet we're one of the leading projects in Web3. And we have so much to look forward to. We already have a few thousand people that have purchased our avatars and our land in anticipation of launching this game with us. If we're successful, which we fully expect to be, we're literally at the very, very beginning. We're going to grow like a hockey stick. As soon as we drop the horses, as soon as we turn on the MVP, and as soon as people start experiencing the game, word is going to get out that there's something to do here beyond trading avatars. And we're going to grow. And if we look at our comps, we're actually tracking at a higher rate of growth than some of the most successful companies did when they first launched and were at our point. It's truly incredible. And I'm just sharing facts with you. All you have to do is go on to CryptoSlam or OpenSea or any of these sites that track, or Nansen, or any of these sites that track volume, activity, engagement. We have one of the strongest communities, even though we're still small, one of the strongest communities and one of the most active platforms and one of the most successful growth stories of any of these projects. I can assure you that you will not recognize this community or the game as it scales. We are, if everything happens the way we expect it to happen, this thing is going to take off, and we're super excited for it. Now, obviously, there are no promises, but I can tell from the community, and I can tell from the momentum, and I can tell from our comps that what we're doing here is very special. And I can tell from my past experience. This is my 5th startup, my 2nd in Web3, my 2nd in Web3 gaming and sports. And I can tell you the velocity of what we've achieved to date is none other than spectacular. And it's all, and when I talk about it, I'm talking about the community. It's all about the community. And I can also guarantee you that we can't predict all of the new features and what's to come in the future. So that's a big, it's a big uncertainty because nobody can. The space is moving fast, and yet it's crawling. 99.5% of people I know have never bought a cryptocurrency, never bought an NFT, wouldn't know how to do it, and barely understand the space. And yet, we're moving so fast. And I can tell you that in the course of the next year, that this market is going to explode because the masses are going to finally get it and have a way to onboard that doesn't have the friction that we have today. And when that happens, the sky is the limit in terms of how fast this space can grow and how fast we can grow. So I've given you, again, a lot of information. And I'm happy to take about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A if there are people that have questions or would like to share their thoughts on anything. So with that, Ben and Squid, I invite you to open the stage up to our community.
It's good.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Hey, thanks. Dan, you did a lot of talking about farms today, and I'm just getting a little confused in my own terminology between farm and stable. Could you just explain a little how did we get rid of the whole stable function, or stables are still going to be there, but they need to be linked to a farm? Can you give me some clarification on the definition between how you're using farm in this AMA versus stable?
Adam, always nice to have you on stage, and you always have great questions, so thank you. This was actually something we were discussing this morning because our product development team is putting together a glossary so that we can begin to standardize our terminology. So I will hopefully provide the clarity you need right now. A farm is the aggregation of a lot of assets. So it starts with land. Land assembled in a certain way creates a farm. That farm requires a stable, and the stable houses the horses. A stable can only be put on a farm that has a size that can accommodate it, because there are certain requirements around the size of land you need to support a horse. And it's 1 acre per horse. So if you have 10 acres, you have you can buy a stable that has 10 stalls in it, and you can house 10 horses. When I speak about a farm, I'm talking about an entity that includes land, includes stables, and can include an estate. And an estate is currently a feature that we will make available very soon that will allow you to essentially flex your clout. It's a meetup place. It's a place people can learn more about you and your farm and your community, and it's going to be very cool. But that's what a farm is. It's the aggregation of a lot of assets. And depending on the farm that you have, and there's a lot of data out there you can read in the gameplay, different farms have different utilities. So private farms are unable, by example, to accept third-party horses. You can only stable your horses on your private farm. A public farm is a farm where you can invite other people to stable with you and form a community, by example. And then there are community farms, which is where your horse will appear initially, and I will have an AMA on community farms for everybody to understand, but I don't want to go into it right now because it really doesn't involve significant strategy and around gameplay. So hopefully that clarified what a farm is.
Yeah, thanks. I look forward to the glossary.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for that information, Dan. That was very, very clear and concise. Thank you for that. I did have a question on the syndication of stables. we're just talking about sharing revenue based on the horses in there, and we're not talking about tokenization of the stables at this point. Is that correct? And is there a plan for that at some point?
That's a great question. We've talked about it in the past, and I'll just clarify it again. Initially, when you to own a farm with stables, it can only be owned by one wallet. Now, if you choose to share that wallet with other people and create your own syndicate of ownership, you can do that outside of the game, but we have nothing to do with it. In the future, and it's on our roadmap, our intention is to create within the game the ability to share ownership of a farm with other people. And the benefit of that is that you get to share in the earnings or the rewards associated with the horses that are paying you in kind through their shared earnings or pooled earnings. You get to share that piece and the governance of the farm together. If you're just stabling your horses on the same farm, you're all sharing in the earnings of your horses, but you're not sharing in the cut that the farm owner is getting.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey guys, how are you? First off, thanks for all the information. Always, a pleasure hearing you guys speak about the future, what's to come, and everything. My question is on the economy that you touched on a little bit. I'm just curious about the scale relative to the real world right now. I don't know if you have this information, but if you did, what's the annual, prize purse for winning horses in the United States? And what are you guys planning on investing in the SLK token in comparison to that prize pool?
So, Vincent, nice to have you on stage again. I would encourage you to listen to the last AMA that I did last week, which has all of that information. I'll just answer it briefly that we intend to start the economy around a little over 1% of the real world. In the real world, there is over $1 billion of prize purse that's distributed to the owners of winning horses. That's the aggregate number. Obviously, the number of 2-year-olds that race and earn in their first year is disproportionate. It's much smaller than the 3 and 4-year-olds, for example. And the number includes all ages. But that is our intention. We're also intending to start the game as a cash game, meaning that you're going to win real liquid assets as opposed to a native token. And I discussed that in detail in the last AMA so that we can grow the community, reduce the volatility of earnings, and create a game in which the prize money is going to be off the charts. I mean, I described it as insane. It's when you do the math, and again, I can't represent it from our point right now because it's very speculative, but when you do the math, and we did the math for you in the AMA, the numbers are off the chart. If the community grows the way I anticipate it growing and behaves in the way we assume it's going to behave, and compare it to other games that have launched with a similar trajectory, this game can deliver millions and millions of dollars of rewards to owners of horses that win races and that breed. And horses can have incredible value over time, measured in the millions and tens of millions of dollars. These are all just statements that I'm making based on hypothetical models. Of course, none of this could work, but I'm just giving you our standard disclaimer. Remember, this is a game where you're buying assets that can compete without having to pay anything, right? When you buy a horse, when you mint a horse, you're competing without having to put up any money ever, right? And if that horse becomes a stallion, that horse can be worth a fortune because the rewards it can earn in the future can be quite substantial. But I encourage you to listen to last week's AMA. It is very specific about those numbers.
Yeah. Also, you could go to the main stage slides when you listen, and you could follow along with the slides. And last year, Echo Zulu, the 2-year-old, made 1.4 million, and then last year, the number one 3-year-old made 2.8 million. And those Dan explains on the last AMA how that's into.
And right now, the hypothetical model that we shared makes the assumption that we start at a little over 1% and we get to 40% of the real world in 10 years. We didn't publish the scale of that growth, but I think it's fairly shallow in the early years and steeper in the later years. And the economy, when we look at it, is very, very compelling. So I'll talk more about it as we get closer to the launch of the game, but it's really quite spectacular.
Awesome. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me again. And yeah, I'll definitely check out last week's AMA. I might have heard some of it, but I think I missed it, so I'll definitely check it out. I appreciate the info, guys.
Yep, you're welcome.
Hey, how are you? It's always a pleasure to listen to you guys. Dan, thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time to break this stuff down. My question is, and it may have been covered at some point, I may have missed it, but I don't believe I did. And you might be covering it at a future date. I have a tendency to jump the gun on certain things. I'm not quite understanding how the payouts will go for the breeding. So if I was to acquire a broodmare and it was producing, how those payouts would go back to the owner of the broodmare, like what percentages and things of that nature.
So you're right. We have not. Well, we have talked about the methodology. We haven't given you percentages, but I will recap it for you. The way you earn rewards from breeding is when your horse breeds, it will produce a foal that 1 year later is going to be sold, tokenized and sold by us as a yearling. When that happens, a percentage of that transaction will get routed by a smart contract to the wallet of the owner of the broodmare and the wallet of the owner of the mare automatically. So if you own a stallion that produces a couple of hundred horses a year, we will eventually tokenize those horses. And when they're tokenized and sold, be it through a mint or an auction or whatever, you're going to receive a percentage, you're going to receive a reward that will be calculated algorithmically and distributed to you as the owner of the stallion. A stallion can produce hundreds of horses a year, a broodmare can produce one. And they can both breed for most of their lives, which is about 15 or 16 years of productivity as breeders. When that part of the game begins, owning those assets that you bought as yearlings could be very valuable if those horses are productive. I can tell you that while we haven't published the percentages because we don't want to be committed to, we don't want to be locked in this early into that, because if the model, if the trajectory changes or we're off on certain things, we want to make sure that the game is viable and that we have the capital to distribute it properly. But we believe, remember, these horses are going to be sold at a higher price each year. So if you're minting a yearling right now at $500, and that yearling in 3 years has a baby that becomes a yearling in year 4, and we're selling it at that point, right? 4 years from now, we anticipate the cost of a horse at mint to be many times the $500 that you're minting at today. It could be 4 or 5 times that price. In which case, you're going to get a percentage of a transaction from a very valuable horse. And that's kind of how the game works.
Okay, great. That actually explained it very well. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I mean, when you think about it, it's pretty incredible because you're buying into a game right now with a low price point, and all of these assets are scheduled to rise as the community grows over time. And the benefits on the breeding side come kind of at the higher end of that cycle, right? Once we're mature, once these assets start trading at much higher values. So the benefits, when you look at the winners in this game on the breeding side, are going to be astronomical. That's where the most rewards are going to be made, is going to be on the breeding side in years to come.
I appreciate that. Thank you for taking the time to answer my question.
You're welcome.
Hi, hello Dan. Okay, I'll try and make it just one. You haven't talked about yet land price that you will offer it later on, or stable prices. I know it might still be early, but if you can just talk about it in broad strokes. I mean, how many land, how much more expensive or cheaper, how many stables, how expensive will they be compared to current land, and so on.
Okay, so good question. We have not published any information yet on that. And the reason we haven't published information on the land prices yet is because we're waiting for, people are just beginning to mint their claims right now, or claim their mints right now. And we're not going to open up land sales until the land map is published, which is right around the MVP time. So we're kind of holding that close to the vest. I can tell you that there's a lot about land that is going to be shared soon, and about stables that are going to be shared soon to the community. And there's a lot of value that you're unaware of yet. My personal view is, and if I had to speculate, we will price the land probably after the community starts forming and the game launches, and people will be able to buy that land, and it'll be driven by location, and the prices will vary based on a variety of different things that will be calculated algorithmically. So there isn't a single price right now, and I don't want to. I don't want to speculate on what I think that price is going to be, because ultimately the market is going to dictate it. But we've designed the game in a way that should drive organic demand and growth in pricing based on a lot of different factors. But most importantly, based on the fact that I think as people develop farms and begin to see the benefits of owning farms, that there's going to be a tremendous amount of interest in wanting to own them. And if you can afford to own one, you're going to want one. They're going to be spectacular. And I think it's great to be a part of a community, and I think that's a great entry point. But if you can own your own domain, that's a natural desire, and I think people are going to want that. So we've modeled the business to create a lot of scarcity early on. We are not going to release a lot of land. We are not going to be releasing land outside of the Silks Skyfalls region initially, based on our current plans. But that's all I can tell you right now. And I can tell you that with regards to the stables, you'll find out more about the cost associated with the stables and the options there. Probably, I'm going to say almost certainly before the horse mint.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome. And we'll also, everything that I say is in the spirit of understanding this community, understanding where they would like the price points to be and the entry points to be. And we're very aware of, we watch the market every day, we watch behavior every day, we understand where we believe the value of these assets will be over time. And we want to make sure there's a sufficient delta to really reward our early adopters. And so everything we do is thought of, in that spirit and with that an eye towards that.